Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let's continue Divided by Witchcraft. Wednesday the 15th of April 1612. Here we are. The father jumped down from the cart and strode towards the front door of the big hall. No back door for him. I followed behind, wondering if I'd be allowed in through the front and all. I couldn't wait to tell my mam if I were. It were a fine hall, and all of stone, not like the hall at Salisbury, which were larger, to be fair, but had a lot of wood with the stone. There were even glass in every window here, upstairs ones and all, and I stared up at 'em in wonder. It were not like the cottage we lived in. It even had stone on its roof instead of straw. The door opened as we approached, and I jumped behind the father and peered round him. I recognised both men standing on the stoop. They went to the father's mass. One were Robert Holden, the magistrate. This must be his hall then, as I knew the other man well. William Alker lived in a cottage, bigger than ours, aye, but still a cottage in Salisbury. Master Holden shook William's hand and he bowed to the father in greeting as he passed. He barely looked at me. Robert, the father said, and shook Master Holden's hand. I stared at them. Why did they not bow like that, like most folk did? Did you have success with Master Alker? What did he have to say? He has confirmed what you believe, that your father liked Jane not, and did indeed fear she was a witch, and would make him her victim. The father nodded, his face grave, poor fellow, to be tormented so deeply in his final years. Do you have enough now to arrest her? Indeed I do, Master Thomas. I caught the man's smile and wondered if he were fritten all of the father's wrath if he called him wrong. In fact, I have sent men to the lower hall to secure her and bring her here. That is good, although you may need to send them back into Salisbury to pick up a couple of her demonic consorts once you hear what my young Grace here has to say. Grace, this is Master Robert Holden, Esquire. He will ask you some questions and you must tell him what you've told me about your grandmother and aunt, and anything else you have remembered. I pinched my lips tight against my groan. This were going to be a long day of talk and questions. I just hope I wouldn't be getting into any more trouble. Pa were vexed enough about how much time I was spending with the father instead of helping him with the stock and the crops. Although the extra food I brought home from the hall helped stay his temper. I sighed. I had no choice but to say it all again. At least, we were inside now and out of the rain. I told the tale about Granny being a dog sometimes and striking me dumb and senseless, then sat still and watched the father and Master Holden. They were sitting at the other side of a table, and Master Holden had a quill and paper, and had been writing all the time we were talking, and kept asking me to say things again. I reached forward and emptied my tankard of small ale. It was tasty enough, but not as strong as man brewed. I'd have to remember to tell her that. She'd like that hers is better. The two men were talking, their heads together, and I thought I might as well give it a go. I reached forward, grasped the jug, and filled my tankard back up. The father glanced at me with a frown, but Master Holden didn't seem to notice. I hid my grin with the tankard as I sipped more ale. After a while, Master Holden looked up at me. And how do you suppose your grandmother changed her appearance into that of a dog? I glanced up at father, who nodded. We talked about this the other day, when I was learning from the horrible Inquisitor's book. There were all sorts in them pages that I didn't know were signs of witchcraft. I were truly frit now of Granny and Aunt Ellen, and everything they did. Well, summat happened about a year since, before I knew my Granny and Aunt were witches. Your granny is Janet Bailey and your aunt Ellen Bailey? I nodded, my lips tight. He kept asking me that, and I kept telling him. What was the point of writing it down if he didn't look back at his words? I took another sip of ale to hide my frown. And you are sure it was a year ago? Aye. I remember it will end. Master Holden nodded, and I took that as leave to carry on with the tale. One night they came to our cottage, took me out with them. We went out fields to Thomas Walshman's cottage. He's the ferryman. I paused, but he didn't ask any more questions. And he rode. The doors were all barred, of course, but Granny opened them anyway. How did she do that? I don't know, master. I couldn't see what she did. I were behind her. He nodded again, used his quill, then looked up at me. Well, Granny went up the stairs to the sleeping chamber and came back down with their babby. And the parents did not wake. No, sir. We heard not a peep from them the whole time we were there. The babby never made noise neither. And he rode. I was sat by the fire. Even though the peat were banked up, there was still a bit of warmth there. And Granny put the babby into my arms to hold. And then, yes, then what did she do? Well, she took a small nail, an iron one, she had in her apron, and thrust it into the babby's belly to make an hole. Master Holden was staring at me, and I nodded to tell him I was serious. Where exactly did they make the hole? Can you point to the place on your own body? I did so, and they seemed happy. And did the child cry? Father Christopher asked. Nay, it stayed quiet. I found that now, not calling him anything actually, or sticking to sir, were better than getting my masters and fathers mixed up. And then what happened? I turned back to Master Holden. She took a quill from her apron, a bit like that and there. I nodded at his hand, placed it in the hole in the babby, and did suck there a good space. Master Holden looked ill. Father Southworth waved his hand at me to carry on talking. Then Aunt Ellen did it too. Master Holden held his hand up while he wrote all this down, and I sipped me ale to wet me throat. All this talking were making it sore. And then Granny took the babby back upstairs to its mam and pa. Then they took me back home. Did you suck from the baby, Grace? Father Southwood asked. Oh, no, sir, I did not. Nothing would make me do that. But you watched them do it and did not try to stop them, Master Holden said. I shrugged. They're me aunt and Granny, me elders. I were only a child. What could I do? I weren't only a child. I'd been 13, but best. They thought of me that way. It were better than being thought a witch too. What happened when you returned home? Nothing, master. My mum and pa never knew I were gone. What happened to the child? Well, he were never the same after that. I lost Paulie. Andy passed not long after. I see. And was that the end of it? No, master. After he died and were buried, Granny and Aunt Ellen came for me again, and they took me to the churchyard, and we took up the babby. Master Holden swallowed and took a long gulp of ale. I watched the lump in his throat go up and down, and wondered if the ale were going to come back out again. Which churchyard? His voice were a croak. The one at Salisbury, master, by the river, St. Leonard the Less. He took more ale and wrote this down. He didn't look up at me again, but waited, head bowed for me to tell the rest. We took him back to Granny's house, and some of him we boiled in a pot, some she roasted in the fire. Both men looked a bit green around the gills now, but then they'd never have butchered a lamb or wrung a chicken's neck. They'd us do that for 'em. Meat is meat, as my ma always says. Master Holden cleared his throat. Did they eat? Aye, they did, master. Not me, though. I don't eat babbies, and they couldn't make me. The men stared at me, and I rushed on. The sooner this were done, the sooner I could go home. They boiled the bones in a pot till they were runny and made a paste, and that's what they put on themselves to change their shape into dogs, or aught else they want to look like. I nodded to show them it were true. Aye, and to take flight and all. Master Holden didn't ask me to say any of that again. I don't think he'd ever forget it. But he wrote it all down, and he wrote. I helped me send to some more ale. Not even Father Christopher seemed to care now. Reckon I could help me send to out here, and they wouldn't bat an eyelid. Not after that. You? The shout came as soon as Master Holden's steward opened the front door. I jumped and tried to hide behind the father once more as I recognised Jane Southworth. That was a mistake. She jerked away from the men holding her and flew at the father. This is your doing, Christopher. Did you know they were going to arrest me in front of Thomas? He's 12 years old and watched his mother being taken away in irons. She shook her manacled hands in his face. He leaned away from her, and I stepped around him, fearing he were going to knock me off. I looked up at him, and he was smiling. That was your doing, not mine, mistress. You should not have been dabbling in witchcraft. Then you would not have been arrested in front of your own son. You know damn well I am no witch. The father frowned at the blasphemy and stared down to her. He were enjoying her distress. It were clear. And you, she'd seen me, you stupid child. Do you have any idea what you've done? Your pa should flog you. She slapped me, and her manacles caught the side of my head and knocked me to the ground. I slipped down the steps and stared up at her, dazed. Aye, she must be a witch. She were as bad as Granny and Aunt Ellen, if not worse. Was she the one that made them witches? I knew enough to stay where I were, though, and keep my mouth shut, at least until the two men had a good hold of her again. The father stepped o'er me and bent to thrust his face into Mistress Southworth. It seems you have robbed the child of her speech and senses. More proof of witchcraft. Mistress Southworth stared at him, her mouth open. She did not protest, as the men she had shaken off grasped her arms once more. Why can you not face the truth? She said, her voice calm and now. After the gunpowder treason, there's no room here for the Catholic faith, far from resuscitating the Church of Rome on these shores. Fawkes and his gang have lost it to us all. The only true church in England now is the Church of England. Even you must see that. The father said nought, but watched her being led away with a smile on his face. Master Holden stepped forward, stood next to me and him. I'll send the men back out to fetch Janet and Ellen Bailey. Then all three shall be committed to Lancaster Castle for examination, no doubt trial, and the next assizes. The father nodded, then beckoned me and walked to the cart. I followed as quietly as I could. I just wanted to go home and forget this day had ever happened. And that's the end of this part, guys. As you can see, the stories get exaggerated, led into something else, and then, oh dear, dear, we have quite a case on our hands. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.